Welcome to On the Bauble Podcast, episode 21. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be talking about the CC meta for ProQuest Season 3 that's coming up this weekend for, I think, 3 weeks. I think it's the last day is the 29th, is that correct?
Yeah, it should be the Sunday. I think it's the 29th of January.
Okay, and also we're going to be talking about the Age Open in SoCal. Age stands for Arcane Games and Events.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, perfect. But before that, did you do anything this weekend?
Not really. I've just been doing a little bit of testing, getting caught up on work, trying to gear up for ProQuest season. But yeah, nothing too noteworthy or exciting. Just staying at home mostly. How about you?
I haven't played Flesh and Blood at all, but what I did do was sort maybe a third of my cards. And what I mean sort, I just sorted by rarity so far, but I really need to finish sorting all of my cards and figure out what I own and what I don't own. And it looks like I have like over 1,000 M's just in a pile right now.
Just assorted M's.
Yeah, assorted M's from various sets of from the most of unplayables to Command and Conquers.
How many commons and rares do you have, if you had to estimate?
Well, just from looking at that corner of my room, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 foros of commons. That's unsorted.
There's probably commons and rares in there, right?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, commons and rare, just bulk from drafting. And on top of my table, I have another couple thousand on my table right now. Of I've been I have this really bad habit of just after a draft or after just getting cards, it just put the whole pile of draft shaft, including M's, on top of a table, and then 2 weeks later I'll just put more cards on top and more cards on top. So I have to sift through all of the bulk to be oh, there's a Command and Conquer in here. Oh, there's an E-Strike in here.
That makes a lot of sense. And for anyone that doesn't know Jay, he will, at the end of a draft, if people don't want their bulk, he will usually take it. If there's a new player that wants it, of course it goes to the new player. But if nobody wants it, Jay will just take all the bulk. So that's part of why I was asking how many commons and rares he has in his room.
Yeah, it's good that in these situations right before a ProQuest season, and I don't really have time to go to a store to pick up the commons and rares, at least I can spend a couple of hours just looking for the commons and rares that I need. And ProQuest is coming up in 6 days, and I don't have a deck built yet, so it's gonna be a little bit stressful for the next couple of days figuring out what to play. And hopefully this episode, by the end of this episode, I can figure out what I'm gonna do.
Jay learning all about the CC meta on the fly.
Yes, I'm actually pretty rusty on CC. I haven't played since testing Arachne intensely and then realizing that's not a real deck for this format.
Yeah, Arachne unfortunately just a little bit short, but with Assassin being confirmed in Outsiders, maybe I don't think it's so far off.
Yeah, I think we just need a little bit more stuff, or maybe just another different hero ability with assassins that would make it more playable. But let's talk about our current format. You wanted to start off with the Age Open in SoCal?
Yeah, so this was a 1K. It's all streamed on YouTube. We can give links to that. I'm sure you can also just find it if you search Age Open Flesh and Blood or something like that. So I guess first off, we can talk about the meta breakdown. There was 18% Icelander as the most represented deck. Then Fi and Oldhim tied at 13% for second most represented. We have 10% Dash, 10% Bravo, followed by 8% Bolton, 8% Briar. Bolton's a bit of a surprise there. Then 6% Dromai, 6% Lexi, 4% Viserai, and 4% Azalea. So pretty good spread, but those Icelander, Fi, Oldhim, Dash, and Bravo, I guess being the 5 most popular heroes, and then everything else was kind of spread pretty thin.
Do we know how many players showed up to this event, or?
I believe it was 38, 40, somewhere around there. So it's not huge, but probably similar to most people's ProQuests.
Okay, so it's like a event right before the ProQuest season. At least that gives us like a some kind of outline of like what the format should look like.
Yeah, and I'll say that kind of right out of the gate, this isn't super surprising. I feel like a lot of people that I've talked to have, and I also agree that Icelander, Fi, Oldhim, and Dash are sort of like the clear picks, but it is quite an open meta, and I'm not surprised to see a fair representation of like Bravo, Briar, Dromai, even Lexi is not too surprising. Bolton at 8% is a shock, but with such a small field, there could just be a few Bolton mains there, so that could skew things.
Yeah, and this is like our first major series, or like a the ProQuest is gonna be the first major event leading up from what is the newest set called?
Dynasty.
Dynasty. Yes, yes, Dynasty. So like we do have a couple of newer stuff. Mainly, I feel like Dash is the biggest winner from this set,
Mhm.
gaining the most amount of cards.
Yeah, we have had a couple other smaller events. Like there was a few Battle Hardens early on, but a lot of those I feel like were closer to the set release. And this is the first event that we've had in a little while, and I feel like the meta is kind of, especially the first Battle Hardened, it was like right when the set launched, and everybody was kind of trying new cards. And I feel like this is a little bit more solidified. People have more time to test and try things out.
Okay, let's move on to the top eight of this event. So we had eight players going to the top eight. Looks like the breakdown was the most represented two Icelanders in the top eight. We have two Bravos, and then followed by a Dash player, a Lexi player, a Briar player, and an Oldham player. Is there any notable names of these players here that you know of?
Yeah, so most notably, we have Chris Ayali on Lexi Livewire, who came in second at Worlds. And then we have Craig Pollock, who also tests with Chris and plays a bunch in that area. And I've also heard people talk about Anthony Pham as well. Um, Not exactly sure on like everything that like their full resumes or anything, but I know that they're like known players and known to be quite strong. And we see all of them go to semis, and eventually it's Chris versus Craig in the finals. That's Chris on Lexi, Craig on Oldham, and Craig closes it out on Oldham.
Do we know what type of Oldham or what type of Lexi they were on?
Yeah, so Chris was running sort of a Ice Lexi build with no Art of Wars and having a little bit heavier fuse. So there was, I believe, there was two Insidious Chills in the deck, as well as two energy potions to help the deck set up in some of the like slower ice-based matchups if it needs to, and then sort of a lot of the standard stuff that you'd expect, like Pathing Helix, Bolton Shots, a lot of the good arrows, notably Drill Shot and Heat Seeker coming in from Dynasty, which makes a lot of sense. Those are just sort of obviously powerful attacks that slot right into the deck. And yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Pretty good into the aggressive decks, and I think a decent Icelander matchup. And it's really just the Guardian matchup that can be a little bit rough for Lexi there, as it has been for quite some time.
Then what about the other side? Craig's Oldham list. Do you know anything about that one?
Yeah, Craig's Oldham list is fairly interesting. It is like a more aggressive leaning Oldham, I would say. Notable cards that I saw that kind of stood out was he was playing Red Disables, and he was also playing this. I don't think he was playing it in all matchups, but in the semifinals game against Anthony Pham, who was on Icelander, he played three energy potions, which ended up being really crucial in the end game because often Icelander, when both heroes get low, can close out the game by playing a card out of Arsenal and coming in with Storm Striders. But the energy potions just give you so much insulation from that you can kind of keep extending without being at risk of dying. And also, it gives you extra ways to pop the frostbites if they try to go for an isothermal combo. So
Wow, that's super interesting.
yeah, I do think that Icelander does have the tools to get around it, and the energy potions can be pretty slow. But if they don't have experience playing into it, you might be able to catch them off guard, and it makes the end game much trickier to navigate and puts a lot of pressure on the Icelander player, I think.
Anything else you want to talk about for the Age Open?
Not too much. I think it's interesting that there was no Phis in the top eight. I don't know if that's just because of sometimes at these small events is just a matter of like who's on, like which players are on certain decks. I don't really know. But interesting to see Fi absent, since I think Fi is a lot of people's choice as one of the strongest decks in the format. That being said, it's like pretty small field, so it's hard to say for sure. Just one event.
Yeah, it looks like, and the three notable names you pulled out talking about this event, Chris, Craig, and Anthony, seems like they're playing decks that beat Fi as well.
Yeah, they're all on ice decks. I think the Icelander matchup in Defy is pretty close, but certainly Oldham and Lexi are pretty solid in Defy.
Okay, let's move on to our CC meta breakdown. Looks like you've done a video that already came up with Spark of Genius as well, right?
Yeah, we sort of did a tier list on Spark of Genius. In a lot of ways, I think things haven't shifted a huge amount from there, but I think I have a little bit of a different way of sort of like framing how I think about like the groupings, like the tiers or groupings of heroes than maybe Eric and Rob, and so I can kind of give you like a bit of a just like a slightly different lens or a slightly different framework there to think about the metagame and sort of how these decks I think measure up against one another.
Okay, perfect.
So for me, the kind of meta decks or tier one decks, if you would, are sort of, I think what defines these decks is that they're well represented and they have pretty close matchups against each other. There might be slight favorites, but they can all win against each other. And I don't think any of them get worse than maybe like 40-60 into another top deck.
I
They're
think
also
before
pretty, sorry?
Sorry, before we just move on to that, I think what a really good indicator to just start off with is this current format, unlike some of the older formats, we don't have a tier 0 deck. It doesn't seem like there's like Bravo, the
Star of the show?
Bravo Star of the Show, is that the name?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have a Bravo Star of the Show or like Chain when Monarch first came out. Like this clear tier 0 decks. All the decks are pretty close. Like I think I just wanted to like start off with that as there isn't a if you want to win this event, you have to play this deck right now.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And so we sort of do have like a tier one, tier two, and tier three, but I think that the tiers are pretty close and you can make a case for kind of any of them. But what I think defines sort of the most represented meta decks is that they're very closely matched against each other. They don't get much worse than 40-60 into the other top meta decks. Like they'll have some favorable, some unfavorable, and they're generally pretty good against most of the off meta decks. So I guess really here, like the first of these is Fi. I think Fi is sort of one of the premier aggro decks in the format. Very, very good proactive game plan, can play like a surprisingly good sort of mid-range game off small size hands with like E-Strike and all the block threes, and can also just pop off with Art of War and Lynx and do 25-30 damage. So Fi's been pretty robust, and I think a lot of the decks like Pablo Pintor's and Dan Rutowski's that we saw at Worlds were very very, very strong. And I'd look to decks like that if you're interested in playing Fi.
And also, it looks like Fi has a couple of different variations. Like the version that I was playing for Worlds was like a little bit combo heavier, with less 3 blocks. So that deck would almost never block. Whereas I think Pablo's deck had more 3 blocks. And you got to play more defensive and just slower turns, essentially.
Yeah, definitely different ways you can build it. I think some of the reasons you might want to bring Fi is your Icelander matchup is pretty good. I think you're maybe slightly unfavored into Oldham and Dash, but the games are still close. Fi's just so explosive that he's always in the game. And then I think you're pretty favored into basically the rest of the field. Maybe like a couple, like the Rangers can give you a hard time, but pretty much any of the sort of not kind of the top 4 decks, I think Fi is really, really good into. So because of that, I think Fi is just like a really solid, well-rounded choice. Proactive decks are often good early in the metagame, and I think that Fi is, if you're not sure what to play, Fi would be like one of my strongest recommendations with where to start.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. Then next is Icelander. You play Icelander a lot.
Yeah. So I love playing Icelander. I think she is also kind of undisputedly one of the best decks after seeing Michael Hamilton take down Worlds. She's just very well rounded, is very good at playing kind of a fair game and then just closing out the game with Stormstriders. She's resistant to fatigue because you have the Frost Hex Ice Eternal package and you can set up Insidious Chills, Amulets, Energy Potions to have this like really explosive endgame, and those are all just in your blue cards. So it's kind of free for her to do that. What I will say about Icelander is I think she's one of the harder decks to pilot, and she doesn't really get free wins. You kind of have to work for all of your wins, and it can be quite punishing if you make mistakes. So I think Icelander is a great deck if you have the reps on her and you feel confident. In particular, I think her Guardian matchup is really, really good, and her aggro matchups are close, but can be a little. The more Channel Lakes, early Insidious Chills, and Aether Ice Fiends you find, the better that those aggro matchups are, and the less that you see those cards, the worse they are, and sometimes you can just get run over. So, well, I think Icelander is a top tier deck. I think that you should take it if you're experienced on it and comfortable with it, and that's what you want to play. But if you are sort of trying to figure out what to play and you haven't played much Icelander, I don't know if I would recommend picking up the deck right away for this coming week on ProQuest, just because it does really require quite a few reps, I think.
Yeah, there's like a lot of lines and a lot of different plays you can do with Icelander. You just have so many options because you have the option to play on your opponent's turn. And as I just said, it's an option to play on your opponent's turn. So if you just make a mistake and like end up committing to arsenaling a blue, that might just like lose you the game on the spot.
Yeah, for sure. And it sort of reminds me of Prism in that like you're pitching your blues, but you're also playing a lot of your blues. So you have a lot of selection over like which blue is the most important to keep. And Prism was kind of the same way. Like so much of your deck was yellow that you had a lot of choice over like what to pitch and what to play at any given time. And so there just ends up being kind of more options as a result between that and playing on the opponent's turn. There's just so many ways you can play out your hand. It's not so simple as pitch your blue and play your reds. There's many different blues you can pitch and different ways you can go, different sequencing that you can do, and all the little edges kind of add up and matter quite a bit over the course of the game.
So just like not recommended if you don't know how to play Icelander, but if you're pretty confident, you think it's best deck?
I don't know if it is the de facto best deck. I think that Phi and Dash are. I think if I was expecting like a lot of Phi, Dash, Dromai, I might not. Not that I wouldn't bring her, but I would be a little bit less keen on her. And then if you expect to see more like Guardian and off meta decks and Rune Blades, I think she really excels into those matchups. But more than anything, I think she's like well rounded. But you need to have the reps on her.
And number 3 on this list is Oldhim. Which type of Oldhim list? We've seen a lot of different variations of Oldhim lists in the past. Which one do you think is the best right now?
It seems like people are leaning towards more proactive Oldhim builds ever since Pulsivize and Loft got banned, and people have kind of moved away from the Earth cards almost entirely, and cut what is that card?
Oakenold?
Oakenold. Yeah, they seem to have cut Oakenold almost
My favorite
entirely.
card. No.
Yeah, unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like it's worth the deck building restraints. And like some lists will still play in the Autumn's Touch because you can Earth React and it's a blue block 3, and I think that's pretty good. But outside of that, lists have mostly moved away from that. And trying to find some ways to pressure, whether that's with big attacks like Thunderquake, usually some number of pummels in the list, as well as a bunch of go again from cards like Zealous Belting, Browse the Ancients, and Enlightened Strike. So, and I think Oldhim kind of needs to be built in this proactive way in the current meta, because Icelander, if you're too defensive, will just set up an endgame and go over the top. She'll take your whole hand and combo you out with Frostex and Ice Eternal. And similarly, Dash, the onus is really on you to close out the game, or she's going to set up, if she has an item sideboard, she's going to set up her induction chambers and her plasma purifiers, and that end game is just a lot better than your hammer end game, even if you have the Rampart of the Ram's Head, which helps in the matchup. But yeah, I think you need to have a way to close the game relatively quickly against both Icelander and Dash.
In the at Canadian Nationals, this is like almost 6 months ago, and we also had positive Eisenloft, but I ended up playing the one copy of Smashing Good Time, and to sneak it through with a pummel, and that was I was playing a super defensive list of Oldhim, as people might know by now, and that was like my only way to win the game was to basically ice fuse glacial footsteps and then smashing good times it to hit for 13 dominate and hope they don't have a way to stop all 13 damage.
For
And
Dash, I guess.
yeah, for exactly dash, just break one item. And if you can break one item, typically that's like just enough to get to the late game to Okino them out of the game.
One thing I do want to talk about is that I feel like a lot of people are sort of, I hear some people are a little down on Oldhim, and while I don't think he's as dominant as he was in Nationals, I still think he's a really strong choice. And I think that, like, one of the things I hear a lot is like, oh, the Dash matchup is bad, and I think that's just not. There was a point in time where yes, Dash crushed Guardians, but I think with the way that Guardians are being built and as the card pool has expanded, it's pretty hard for Dash to be super favored into Guardian. Certainly, if they have enough D-reacts, enough life gain, they're going to win every time. But when they do that, they sacrifice too much in the aggressive matchups, and I don't think that the kind of moving into Dash, I don't think that the defensive Dash decks are all that good. And it's one of the big challenges with Dash is sort of finding a balance of how do you be good into aggro, how do you be good into Icelander, how do you be good into Oldhim. I think if she only had to build for one of those matchups, or if she had like a 90 card deck, I think she would be probably tier 0, easily the best deck. But she doesn't, and she's quite tight on slots, and you really have to pick and choose. And I think if you have like a rock solid aggro plan, like you have like a full like boost plan for aggro, then you are giving up some points in the Oldhim matchup, and you only have room for so many D reacts. And because of that, I think the matchup between Dash and Oldhim is actually quite close.
Like Dash, the item package with the chambers and stuff, it's like 6 cards, right?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the Dash deck. I know that Matt Rogers posted a list on YouTube that starts Induction Chamber all the time, but even if you're starting on Induction Chamber, you need a second chamber and 3 purifiers, so that's 4 cards and just your items, and then you need D-reacts against Oldhim just to get there. So let's say that you're running 7 D reacts, that's already up to 11 cards, and then you have your equipment and you might want a sideboard card or 2 for other matchups. Like, you run out of slots pretty quickly. And I would say that with 7, like in my testing, the matchup has felt pretty close, and I kind of wish that I had room for a couple more D reacts. But as soon as I start doing that, I don't have enough cards to play a full boost plan into Phi or Briar or something like that. So
We've had a little bit of talk about Construct Nitro and Mechanoid. Do you think that's a real Dash build right now, or do you think that's more of a tier 2 type deck?
in my eyes, it's a little. I'm not exactly sure what it excels in. I've heard that it's good in the Dash Mirror, which I could buy, but it doesn't necessarily have like a clear plan into Guardian. I think that we saw Alan Lau play this in a PTI event, and he had the same kind of item package to bring in against Oldhim, so it'd be similar there. And then into a lot of the aggro decks, you're just a little too slow. Like Phi's really fast. Reinhardt can smash and good time you because the Nitro Mechanoid is an item. So if you, sorry, not smashing good time, he can arg smash you. I guess also smashing good time, but in particular arg smash, you can just roll and destroy your mech. So I think the deck kind of has some problems.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Anything else you want to add on about Dash?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing that Dash got is Pulse Wave Harpoon, and this card is really, really good. I know that we talked about it, and just it's as good as it looked when we previewed it, when we saw it in the preview season. just the extra one cost helps you enact your boost plan where you're going for like max velocities and that kind of a thing. And it also gives you some much needed disruption. And sometimes just looking at three cards and picking a card from it just completely ruins your opponent's turn. And because of that, I think it's just kind of given her, I'd say like she's like the kind of the other aggro deck and the top tier aggro deck. So there's Fi and there's Dash. And I think that Dash is a little bit more consistent. She has like a lot of ways to do above rate things. She has Pulse Wave Harpoon, Toma Findall if you're playing it, high octanes, max velocity. So she has a whole bunch of power cards that let her do like 20-ish point turns. So she's more consistent in that sense, but she has a little bit lower ceiling than Fi, who can do, 30 plus with the right configuration.
Yeah, I think one other thing about Dash is that because all of Dash's cards block for 3 as well, it just has like a better mid-range plan than Fi. And so does her equipment suite too that she typically plays, just blocks a lot more than Fi too.
Yeah, I think Dash really has a lot going for her, and she's really, really flexible. And the biggest thing is sort of that, and I think she has a good Icelander matchup too. Actually, really easy access to AB3 with the Visiratronic Model I. Even though hypothermia kind of shuts you down, Dash is so good at using her resources with the induction chamber because she can always, like, if she's taxed by frostbite, she can load a little bit less into her pistol or whatever. She's just like very, very flexible. And because of that, the frostbites and the disruption often don't, they're not quite as impactful against Dash as they are against Fi or Briar.
So that concludes our tier 1, like the tier 1 decks of this format.
Yeah, and I think that if you're looking for a deck to play, any of those are pretty good choices, and you can kind of pick and choose what you're comfortable with and what you like. But I think that there's a whole bunch of decks in sort of the next category, which we'll call like tier 2 or tier 1.5, tier 1.5, where I think that they're close. Um, but the biggest difference is that most of these decks have one matchup that's pretty bad among the top tier decks. So before I kind of mentioned like none of the bad matchups get worse than 40-60. Here I think that actually into those big four decks that we saw be most represented at the AGE, usually one of those matchups are bad. And because of that, I think that these decks are a little bit weaker choice. But if you know what your metagame is and you want to target it, or you have a lot of reps on these heroes and you're kind of a specialist in one of these decks, I think you could have a good case for bringing them.
Okay. What did you want to start with?
So, first off, I think there's kind of like a few categories here. First off, if you're looking to kind of prey on decks like Dash and decks like Icelander, I actually think that Dromai is quite a good choice, as well as Reinhardt. I think they both just have pretty good plans into both of those decks. Reinhardt with like Arg Smash and this rounds on me is just really solid into Dash and kind of can fatigue her, and the item plan's not so effective if you're playing a bunch of Arg Smashes, and you can kind of just sit there, take your time, clear their items, and then Blood Rush Bellow them. And Dromai sort of just goes wide with dragons, and Dash isn't really completely able to keep up. So I think Dromai is also really solid into her. And both these decks are pretty good into Icelander. Like Dromai because of all the dragons that you can interact with and access to things like sand cover, and then Reinhardt because can sort of play the same value plan that you're doing. Like you're trying to do Wounded Bull, he has Swing Big, and he kind of does a lot of the same kind of plan, but then he just has Blood Rush that can take away your ability to block and kind of go really big a couple times a game. And overall, I think that's a pretty good matchup for Reiner.
Yeah, Reinhardt really excels. I think, or not even just Reinhardt, like both Dromai and Reinhardt are kind of decks that want to play multiple turns and they're looking for one big turn to like really push damage. Dromai not so much, but it's more of like if you don't keep Dromai's dragons in check, then Dromai has like a big turn. But yeah, I think Icelander just has a tough time just keeping both of these the hand sizes of these like later turns like Reinhardt has just easy time of like, okay, this is the turn I'm gonna go off. I take the 7-8 damage and then go off on you, right?
I think the big thing holding these decks back, or reasons you might not want to bring them, are mostly Phi. Phi for Dromai is really terrible. Being able to trigger the Massive Momentum on the dragons is a big problem. Phoenix Flame is also just so efficient at cleaning up Ashwings, and Phi's so good at dividing his damage that he's really not losing much efficiency to clear a dragon. And because he has so much pressure, Dromai doesn't have much time to set up that board state that she wants to set up. And similarly, Reinhardt, if you draw really well with blood rushes, you can get there against Phi. But if you don't see her blood rushes in the first few cards and they aren't really good ones, Phi is just going to do more damage and outvalue you. And there's not a lot that you can do.
Yeah, I think Reinhardt's ability to just like what is the ability called? Is there a name for that ability to like rip a card out of the hand?
Intimidate.
Intimidate, yes. Reinhardt's ability to intimidate Phi's hand. Phi just looks at the card that got intimidated and was like, "This blocks for 2 anyways." So like
Yeah,
the
Phi's the kind of. Go ahead.
no, no. Yeah, I was gonna say just like intimidate on Reinhardt really doesn't matter against Phi, and that's like the biggest reason why Reinhardt is just like not that good against Phi.
In general, I think when decks want to block, Reinhardt does well, and when decks just want to keep their hand and attack you, Reinhardt's not in a great spot. So, depending on your metagame, if you're expecting a lot of dash, if you're expecting a lot of Icelander, and you think that there won't be so much of the Phi decks out there, I think that either of these decks could be a really solid choice. And I'm not sure about the Guardian matchup with these, to be honest. I feel like I hear very mixed things in the case of both Dromai and Reiner. I don't think you have a fantastic Oldhim matchup. I think it might be salvageable with the right build. I think that if you are somebody who mains these heroes, you probably have a better idea of exactly how that matchup goes than I do. It's not something that I've personally tested a bunch, and I hear kind of conflicting data points from different people.
Yeah, I feel like those matchups might be more of a skill based games where smaller decisions gonna matter a lot more. And if you're the better Dromai player against a worse Guardian player, you're probably gonna win it. And if it's the other way around, you're probably not gonna. It's probably not gonna be good for you.
The next big category here are anti-aggro decks, and I think these are the Rangers. So while Guardians are good because they're good against aggro decks, I think Ranger decks are even more so. And the biggest reason is that Lexi and Azalea are better at doing damage than the Guardians are, and that faster clock just means usually the way that you lose as a Guardian when you're playing this proactive strategy is you miss on disruption, and then the Phi or the Briar just pop off and do a ton of damage. But with the faster clock that Lexi and Azalea have, you just play fewer turns and there's less time for them to find a spot where you miss. So because of that, I think Lexi and Azalea are both really, really good into Phi and Briar, and even pretty solid into Dash. So I think that I think Lexi might be a slightly stronger choice, probably a little bit better at dealing with the Guardian and definitely the Dromai matchup. Azalea really, really struggles into Dromai, just no way to deal with the dragons and can get fatigued and just lots and lots of problems there. But yeah, I think if you're expecting a lot of aggro and you really want to target those aggro decks, you could bring these. Just know that, the Guardian matchup and also the Dromai matchup are not fantastic for you.
Yeah, so I think it really like everything in the tier 2 category, if you know your local meta, like you can really bring some of these heroes and like actually take down the PQ with them. So, and for the people who are playing the tier 1 decks, just like be cognizant that like if your meta is just like Phi heavy and all the good players are playing Phi and somebody brings Lexi, you might be in trouble.
One of the perks you can get by playing one of these decks is that you probably have more. If this is a deck that you've been practicing and that you're comfortable with, which is kind of like where I'd recommend you bringing these decks because they're a comfort pick for you. If you can do that really well, you probably have more reps than your opponent does in the matchup and more experience, and you might be able to catch them off guard. And I think especially in Flesh and Blood, if you have a plan that your opponent isn't anticipating or isn't ready for or doesn't know how to play into, that is a really, really big edge.
Moment you sit down across from your opponent and they have a plan, you don't. It's hell. It's actual hell because you just block the wrong card and then you lose. You're not expecting the lightning press and they lightning press you, and you just can't come back on those spots sometimes.
The last two decks in kind of tier two, in my eyes, are Bravo and Briar. I don't know if you agree. I feel like they're both pretty good. Like Briar's a really good aggro deck. Channel Mount Heroic's fantastic. Briar's highs are really, really high, and there's a lot of strengths to that deck. But the Icelander matchup is not great, and I'm not sure what Briar does better than Fi or better than Dash. And that's kind of the biggest strike against Briar in my eyes, is that I think Fi and Dash are just a little bit better choices. But if you're more experienced or more comfortable on Briar, um, that could be a big enough reason to bring her. I don't think the gap is huge, but I do think that Dash and Fi slightly edge out Briar as an aggro deck.
The other reason that you might want to bring Briar over Fi or all the other aggro decks is if your local meta isn't prepared for Briar. Because Briar hits on a slightly different angle than Fi through arcane damage, if these players aren't prepared for the off angle arcane or the just like don't have experience against playing against Briar, you can catch people off guard of like doing very big arcane damage on against decks like Fi and Dash. As Yuki said, like the Icelander matchup not that good, but against the other decks, very good choices. Just like being able to Rosetta Thorn or play Revel and Runeblood, like those cards are very powerful cards, and they are either better or how would I say it? They're more efficient than some of Fi's cards. So they're a little harder to play, but it's definitely pretty strong if you can have good draws, essentially.
Yeah. I feel like Briar is like very close to being one of the tier one meta decks, and you can make an argument for her being there. But in my eyes, she is just like a slight step down, and that's kind of why she's in tier two. These tier two decks aren't really in like order per se. Like, it's not Briar's the weakest of the bunch. I think Briar is actually one of the stronger options. But
Yeah, it's more like why bring Briar when you can bring Fi?
exactly. And again, if you're a Briar main and that's your comfort pick and you're really confident and strong with Briar, by all means bring Briar. I think it's a really good choice, and I don't think you can go too wrong. And maybe one thing that Briar has going for her is the Dash matchup might be slightly better. You do get to play, I don't know that for sure, but you do get to play Smashing Good Time pretty comfortably if you want to, since you just want to be playing non-attacks and it buffs power from Arsenal anyways. So maybe that's a good enough reason to bring her. I don't know.
Okay, what about Bravo?
Yeah, so Bravo's the other Guardian. I do think it's sort of interesting. The Bravo and the Oldhim decks are getting closer and closer together as Oldham's becoming more proactive, playing more pummels, playing more big attacks. It's like becoming almost Bravo-esque. And I don't think the gap between them is huge. I think that like Crippling Crush is a real card and it's really, really good. But for me, I think that Oldham's Ice React is just so good against Dash, like really, really good against Dash. It means that they can't boost into you. Whereas Bravo, Hanabi Dash can boost into you, and I think they can get over you. So that's like a big difference there. And I think Oldham just getting access to like the Winter's Whale is such a good weapon. Stalagmite. Yeah, you have Hypothermia, you have Channel Lake Frigid, you have Crown of Seeds. Like, I just think that the equipment suite and those extra ice cards really add a lot. And Crippling Crush isn't nothing, but I think it's just not as good.
Yeah, when you name cards like Stalagmite and Crown of Seeds, and you're like Crippling Crush, this card's good. This card's really good, but Crown of Seeds is a little bit broke.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is it's hard to compete with these because they all like, yeah, maybe I named three cards and they're all one ofs, but Winter's Whale, Stalagmite, and Crown of Seeds, you all start with them in play. And so you get to use them again and again throughout the game, and they just give you a ton of value. I also think that even though Bravo does have access to dominate, Oldhim is actually the tougher guardian for Icelander, and the big reason for that is Crown of Seeds kind of giving you ways to pop frostbites after you've already attacked, giving you ways to get extra cards in your hand, Arcane Barrier if they try to just disincentivize you. Like if you want to play an Aether Hail, but you know that they can Crown of Seeds and they're floating 2 resources, like you're not pushing any damage if you do that, and because of that, you just don't do it. And so just like having an arsenal and having Crown of Seeds is just such a deterrent for Icelander that that's just a lot of value.
Okay, let's move on to the tier 3 decks.
So tier 3 decks is kind of broadly speaking everybody else. So Kano, Katsu, Levia, Bolton, Viserai, Dory, Arachne. And I think that maybe to varying degrees, these heroes are fine. They have some reasonable matchups, but at least in my eyes, they don't really have clear strengths into the current meta or a clear reason why you should be bringing this deck. If it's your comfort pick or the only deck that you own or the deck that you have by far the most experience on and you're confident with it, by all means, I think you can bring it. I don't think it's like you can't win. I very much expect probably multiple of these decks to take down events. I wouldn't be surprised in particular if like Dory, Viserai, Kano take down events. That wouldn't shock me at all. And even some of the others, if maybe like 1 or 2 PQs, it wouldn't surprise me. But I think you want to have a reason to be bringing these, and otherwise, it's not the first place I'd go looking if I'm trying to figure out what deck to pick up and play.
Yeah, that's fair. Is there anyone in particular you want to talk about?
I guess I think one thing for Viserai that really holds, like Viserai was a deck that used to be very, very competitive. And I think Viserai is just held back a little bit by Icelander being fairly tough unless you sideboard a lot for it. Like you need a kind of OTK setup otherwise, or like a setup based sideboard plan. Otherwise, you just lose too much value to Alluvian. And you tend to just get outraced by Fi, Dash, Briar. Like the other aggro decks are just a little faster than you. So while Viserai is like close, I just don't think that he quite keeps up with the other aggro decks currently. And he also has some kind of, it feels like he suffers a little more from inconsistency than maybe not Briar. Briar's are arguably similar, but certainly less consistent than Fi, less consistent than Dash.
Think there's 2 heroes I want to talk about a little bit, which is Kano and Arachne. But Kano, there's a different lots of different variations on Kano now. And all I have to say is if you like just make a mistake and take too much damage here and there against Kano, just remember, if you have to be careful against that deck or you will lose. Like you just will be like, wait, what? Where? How did I lose on turn 3 against Kano?
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw Haydendale doing well on Kano at Worlds. So it definitely is a deck that can do well. I just think that into the biggest thing about Kano right now is that Dash is just going to be such a popular deck, and they have such easy access to AV3 because of Visiratronic and Icelander being a meta deck that I think every Dash deck I see is packing AV3, and they play a whole bunch of blues, like often like 20 plus blues in their deck, and all of that just makes it, on top of being very, very aggressive and being able to push out a ton of damage, it's very, very hard to take down Dash. And so that's sort of why Kano's like a little bit down in tier 3 for me. But I know that there's a lot of big Kano fans that have a lot of experience. And especially if you're not expecting to see much Dash in your area, I think Kano, I wouldn't be surprised to see Kano take down some events.
I'm gonna peg right now that there's gonna be one player somewhere that's gonna win with Brainstorm Kano.
Ooh, I don't know if I'm sold on that deck, but maybe.
That deck has so many issues, but it can win on turn 3. It just has that ability to like block play a potion, block, play a potion, block, play a potion, kill you. So like I have some hopes up that there's some kind of maniac out there that's gonna prove people wrong and say like this is best version of Kano and take something down.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It's definitely interesting. A lot of the builds I've seen have a few too many potions and a few too many two blocks that like that in conjunction with having 30 life um, is
You get
just
blown
pretty
up.
scary. Yeah, you get blown up pretty fast, especially in such an aggressive metagame. But maybe Brainstorm definitely has a really high ceiling. It can pretty easily do 20 damage, which
Could do
is
more.
yeah, but like the reason I say 20 is once you hit 20, when you're drawing that many cards, you can probably find a Blazing Ether, and that should close up the game. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
That's the other 20.
yeah, exactly. So usually, if you can do the first 20 with Brainstorm, you're like probably pretty set.
And I think this is the other deck I want to talk about is Arachne. It's currently the only fatigue deck in the format. Just remember when you get paired against Arachne, play quickly, play fast, because the other Arachne player is gonna be slow. I found this on Talishar whenever I played against the Arachne Mir. Those games were a little bit too slow for my taste. Like what I mean is like the pace of play was a little bit too slow. Your opponent gets to look at the top card of your deck. They might read it. They might think about it. Um, and that's gonna go on every time they attack. And they have a lot of thinking to do because it is that type of deck. And you just have to be cognizant of playing quickly yourself, so then you don't go to time and draw the game.
Absolutely. And another kind of, I guess, piece of advice about Arachne is if you are a deck that is concerned about maybe getting fatigued or worn down by Arachne, playing a few extra cards is not necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't bring in cards that are dead in the matchup, but I've been decently happy to just board up to, I don't know, 66 cards, just have a little bit of extra buffer. And I found that has made the matchup a lot more comfortable. So be careful with it. Don't ruin your like blue ratio. Don't bring in cards that don't matter. But if you have extra cards and you can board up and have a pretty functional deck, I wouldn't be scared to do that.
Yeah, as the Arachne player, it's when your opponent presents more than 64, you're hating your life. Like honestly, the 4 extra cards is so much. It's a full turn cycle. That's not even a full turn cycle. Well, it's more than one full turn cycle because you pitch the cards and like it's an extra like 5, 6, 7 cards in the deck essentially that they have to mill somehow.
Yeah, and it often just lets you. You just have to worry. It's hard to like quantify it, but the way that it feels is that you have to worry about decking out a little bit less, and you can focus a little bit more on just playing your game. And by the time you're getting closer to decking out, you usually have them pretty low, and you're in a pretty good spot to just kind of push through and win. That's sort of been my experience with a variety of decks actually, like Icelander, Ranger, Azalea was like this as well. So Dash as well. Yeah,
Arachne just has this. Arachne always has this problem of like, I'm at 1 life, they have 5 cards left. Can I get rid of them?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think that's basically the whole CC metagame right now. Is there
Yeah.
anything else? Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, what do you think, Jay? Have you decided, or do you have any feelings about which decks you're considering bringing after we've had a more discussion?
Right now, my current where I'm at sorting all of my cards, I think I can build Oldham for sure. I just sold Mask of Momentum like 3 weeks ago, so I am missing that card. So unfortunately, I don't think I'll play Fi, but if I really want to, I can borrow it from somebody, so that's not gonna be an issue.
What about like if card availability wasn't a consideration? Where would you go?
If card availability wasn't a consideration, I think I'm just gonna be on Fi. Fi is gonna be a deck that how do I say this better? Fi is definitely one of those decks where I'm making my opponents respond to me rather than me responding to them. And I don't like being in a spot where if my deck isn't all about responding to my opponent, I don't like responding to my opponent. So I think a good example is like if I'm a Briar player, I don't want to be the one trying responsible to respond to my Fi opponent doing things to me.
Yeah, like by that you mean like on hits like snatch, right?
Yeah, I'm like, or just the immense amount of damage, like 20 damage,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
even that too. This is a completely different story if I'm on a complete control deck like Oldham, where I'm like, okay, Fi's trying to like kill me. The only thing I'm doing is disrupting.
Right.
I like that more honestly, but I don't know. I just can't. I don't think Control Oldham is playable right now, so I don't think I'm gonna play it. If I can't play Control, I'm gonna play aggro, and with that logic, I'm gonna play Fi.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that control of them is not really where you want to be. It's hard to control Fi, and on top of that, I think that Dash and Icelander are really going to pose some problems for you. And I think Fi, as we mentioned, is a really, really solid choice. I believe it was also one of the most winning decks on. There was like a Talishar data dump as well, and I think Fi was like the first or second most winning deck there as well. So have a plan into Fi.
I think that also has to do with Fi being one of the easiest decks to play.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little you can do wrong with Fi. There's always gonna be a spot where you're gonna be like, oh, I could have played this turn better, did one more damage, two more damage here and there, but I think overall it's very difficult to misplay with Fi as a lot of their cards is the same card. Like it's like unfortunate to say, but Fi just plays like 20 of the same card, 10 of another same card, and then plays Art of War.
And you have a pretty clear game plan as Fi as well, right? Like you're always pretty much going to be the one on the front foot, pushing damage, making your opponent block, and figure out how they're going to overcome your offense. So yeah, I think Fi is a terrific week one choice. And if you aren't on Fi, you should have a plan, or even if you are on Fi, you should have a plan to deal with him as well as the other decks. But I think Fi is one of the most meta defining decks right now.
Is there any sideboard cards for this weekend that you're thinking about bringing? Like any particular things for either Fi, Oldham, or Icelander?
I think energy potions for a lot of aggressive decks are pretty interesting, and maybe even for Guardian decks. I'm not sure. I would have to test that. I haven't had a chance to play too much into the energy potions. But I think that in general, those make sense against the disruptive ice decks because it helps you get around sort of the frostbite and the tax when you have the hand that when you have the ideal hand, you don't get stopped by having a frostbite. Similarly, I think if you want to target Fi and even to some degree Dash, this round on me is a pretty good choice. You do want to make sure that you're playing a deck that can can support it. So I would not put this in my Dash deck, for example, because you don't want to be hitting non-mech cards. But I think in Briar, it's super reasonable. In Fi, you can make a case for it. And I'm not sure about Icelander. It's a card that I'm hoping to test a little bit this week, but I think it is worth. I think it's worth exploring and maybe just even comparing. Like, look at a Fi hand that's 4 cards, then draw a card and pretend there's a this round of me and compare the damage and sort of see like what the value of that card is exactly, and that might help kind of make the choice for Icelander. So I'm not sure where I'm at, but I think it's worth exploring, and I think that there's multiple decks that can be playing this card.
And I think just to close it off, what are you playing, Yuki? I don't think we touched this yet.
Yeah, so for me, I'm undecided. I think I'm mostly between sort of mid-range hybrid dash list, probably something similar to the one Matt Rogers posted. I do like the Tome of Findals in that deck. I like all the different power cards, and I like the flexibility of going into the item plan when you need it. And if I don't play Dash, then I'll probably just go to Icelander since I think she's rock solid, and I have a lot of reps on her, so real comfort pick for me. It's just I'm wondering like how much Fi there's gonna be. We have like Reinar in our area. Um, some of those matchups are just, especially Fi. It's not a bad matchup. I think it's very close. It's just very you either draw your channel like Sinather Ice Veins or you don't.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right. I hope that you found this helpful, and we wish you the best of luck as you're going into your own local ProQuest season. We'd love to hear in the comments what decks you're planning to bring, and what do you think about the metagame? Is there anything you agree with, disagree with about kind of what we were talking about in terms of how we see all the heroes lining up? We'd love to hear. Um, with that being said, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. If you want to get in touch with us, you can tweet at Jay, at Ueda J on Twitter. You can tweet at me at Yukili Bender on Twitter, or you can email us at onthebauble@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening and good luck in your ProQuests.
And last thing would be you're going to the local PQ, right? Your local PQ? Are you gonna travel for any other PQs?
Great question. So currently we have 2 local PQs. I'm planning to go to both of them for sure. In terms of travel, I'm still deciding. It probably depends a little bit on my work. I have report cards coming up right at the end of the month, so it depends how I'm doing with that, and it also depends on. I'm hoping that we get the Pro Tour announcement soon. They made an announcement that we'll be getting the announcement soon, but we don't know when soon is. But I think, like, for example, I don't know where I am on Elo because it hasn't been updated. I don't know if Elo is being used, but if I qualified on Elo, I'm busy at work, I'm less incentivized to go. So I might drive a little bit, but I'm not sure that I will for sure.
Okay, okay. I'm actually not gonna play the this weekends in Vancouver. I'm
Oh,
traveling to Calgary this weekend.
what are you doing in Calgary?
I'm playing the World Series of Poker circuit event in Calgary, which is technically it's 2 week long. I'm gonna be there for 1 week, and it happens to be the first week of PQ season. And I took the Saturday off to go to their local PQ.
Oh, so you're going to be playing the PQ in Calgary while you're there for the World Series of Poker.
Yeah, yeah. I took Saturday off just for this event.
Awesome. That's cool that you get to play anyways, and in a little bit of a different setting than where we usually play. Are
Honest,
you?
oh,
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say honestly, I think I'm hoping it's gonna be a little bit softer than the Vancouver Pro Quests because here in Vancouver we just have so many good competitive players, like just including you. We have Ian Smith at top forward, top
He was
forward the
finals.
finals of the Canadian Nats. We have Clay, we have Eric, we have other Eric. There's just so many people we have to beat here.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think you'll drive to kind of like Seattle area or interior BC at all?
I want to go to out of our 2 local ProQuest, I would be back for the one at Infinity Games, which is not this weekend, but the weekend after. I'm actually gonna be judging that one instead of playing it, so that's gonna be fun. And there's gonna be another ProQuest the day after in Interior BC, which I'm trying to convince people to go to so then I can share a hotel room with people.
Yes, Jay has been trying to convince me to go to that one as well, and we'll see. I think that one is more likely than the third weekend, because the third weekend I can use that weekend for report cards, and that's just pretty tempting, honestly. Then I don't have to stress as much during the week, but we'll see. If I'm like mostly finished, then I'll probably go.
Yeah, same for me. I'm not sure if I'm gonna go on the third week either. If I'm not qualified, If I'm not qualified by then, I will. Yeah, I think I have to go.
Yeah,
I'm not stoked though. I am not stoked to go down there. It's so much
fair enough.
money. Oh.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. That's all we want to talk about the ProQuest season.